What are the three factors that are critical for any supply chain analytics project to be successful?
Okay, thanks, Dustin. Good afternoon. Thanks for having me. What I would say is here, a lot of articles that you read in today's world, they talk about supply chain analytics being the next big thing, with the big data coming in, with the ability to analyze data using machine learning and develop insights. What I've felt over the last 8 years since I've worked on such projects, when we looked at data analytics from supply chain information to look at strategic network design or inventory optimization or getting other insights from the supply chain data, what I always in the end realized is that the software is, in my point of view, a less important factor in the success of such projects than some other soft part, and I will define them one by one for you. The first one is manageable scope. I've often seen companies, when they're trying to do a supply chain analytics project, they start building up projects which are very wide, very broad in scope, with a lot of details, taking the analysis to an SKU level. And I always felt that this is really not helpful because it really makes the scope unmanageable. You're focusing on too many parameters, and instead of simplification, you make your model very complex, and you really do not understand at times the implication of changes within the model. So I would say manageable scope, which means start small, start with a selected location, selected group of products, and then gradually build on it. You add more and more complexity to it instead of starting with big complex and then going into details. That's one thing. The second thing is the right amount of data. And again, like I said, this is one of the most critical areas within these supply chain analytics projects that I've seen, that people often underestimate the importance of the data. Most of the time, data collection, data cleaning, and data evaluation and validation is the part which almost takes 50 to 60% of the time within the project. That's the second and most important thing. And the third thing is that what I miss at times from the people who are running such projects is a basic knowledge of mathematics or statistics. It's easy to run a software, but it's difficult to understand what is behind a certain number, why the system is throwing this certain number. So these minute changes, how that formula is working at the back of a certain column or a certain output, even if you do not understand the whole mathematics behind it, conceptually people should be able to understand what is the statistics, what is the mathematics behind it. And I think these are the key things that I always feel people miss, and often these such projects are not as successful as they initially hope to be.
Thanks. And my next question is about the trend of inbound management. What are the benefits of it?
That's inbound management. That's a very, very, very interesting topic. So just for the viewers and listeners, inbound management is the area where the company starts thinking about managing their inbound shipments. So the shipments which are coming from the supplier to the factory or to the warehouse which the company owns. Usually we have seen that it's the supplier who is organizing this transportation, who pays for it, and then adds the cost of the transportation in his invoice to the buyer. Now there is a growing trend, and there's also a growing interest within the industry, across industries actually, to see what are the benefits if you try to manage the inbound by yourself. So you essentially manage the shipments that are coming from the supplier to you. And I can tell you a lot of big companies are working on it right now. For example, Amazon, they started a massive project in Europe 3 years ago to bring inbound under their control. And there are definitely benefits. One is, of course, the scope. The volume, as the volume becomes larger, you have better ability to negotiate, let's say, better rates with suppliers. Second thing is visibility. Now, instead of the supplier billing you, you have the cost visibility. You know how much it's actually costing you to bring the product from the supplier to your factory. Previously, you were just getting an invoice where maybe there was a line item in the invoice saying transportation cost, or maybe it was not even there, and the supplier was charging you one fixed amount, one whole amount. So at least it brings visibility for the company to know what is the cost of buying from the supplier. And the third thing is also the visibility in terms of the shipment. So what I've seen often in companies where I either consult is that companies usually do not have an insight as to what would land in their warehouse or in their factory production next day. Usually, what happens is that you have at the morning of the shipment delivery, the trucking company calls you up and say, "Hey, I have a shipment for you, and I will deliver it at 12 o'clock." And that's the first heads up they get. Now, if you are controlling your inbound, then through the messages like advanced shipping notification, through the ability to manage the inbound, the companies can actually already know in advance what the shipment is going to be picked up from the supplier, when it's going to arrive at the location, at the factory location or the warehouse, and if there is any issue during this transit, it could be easily visible for the company. And what it does is, it does in fact then impact the net working capital. Because if you have higher visibility, more transparency, you know that you do not have to keep as much buffer of inventory as earlier expected. Now you have more visibility. Now you know you have more information, so you can take better and more calculated risk instead of keeping a lot of buffer just to prepare for every possible scenario. So I think those three things. One, in terms of cost, that you manage higher volumes, so of course your cost per unit has to go down. Second, the visibility in terms of the cost itself. And the third is the visibility in terms of track and trace of the shipment, which allows the companies to lower their net working capital. These would be my three key things in terms of benefits of inbound, Dustin.
Thanks. And what about centers of excellence? Can you talk about the 4PL concept, what it is, and how it will impact the supply chain?
Yeah, sure. So 4PL concept is not new in the industry. It's been around for many years, and a lot of companies like Ford have actually already been doing this for more than 15 years now. The companies do it a different way. Let me explain what 4PL means. 4PL basically means that its full form is fourth-party logistics provider, which means that there is another party which is managing your transportation on your behalf. So they act as like an air traffic control tower, and they see, okay, which shipment needs to go from here to there, and then they would then organize the transportation. Then they would make sure they have a proper visibility of that shipment going from A to B, and if there is any let's say any alerts, any delays for that shipment, they can inform their customer. And that's the planning and the monitoring part. And the last part is the invoicing. So they also do freight payment and invoice and auditing. So they check the invoices that are coming from the freight forwarder, and they automatically they either pay directly or help the customer to set up a system to pay them more easily. So that's basically a 4PL concept. And I think more and more companies are going towards this direction now. Either they are building their own centers of excellence or 4PL within their company, or they're outsourcing it to companies like DHL or companies like UPS or Kiranagal, DB Shankar, etc., etc. So you can work in both ways. the way I see it is if I have to think about the impact in the supply chain, again, it all comes down to how are you managing the supply chain? Is it that are the experts managing it, or do you have some person locally sitting on the ground in a plant who is doing 5 other things and he's also doing transportation? So the key thing is how much expertise the companies want to develop within the function of supply chain. And what I'm talking about right now is purely from a distribution point of view, transportation and distribution. But you can also have a center of excellence for purchasing, for procurement. You can also have a center of excellence for indirect procurement, for material, for indirect material. There are different ways of setting up these centers of excellence. I personally see very, very big impact of such centers. Of course, they have to be done. There is no one size fits all. It depends on the company itself. What is the culture of the company? Is it very decentralized? Is it already centralized? For companies like GE, which are very centralized, it's perhaps easier to go towards this direction, whereas companies which are very decentralized would find it difficult to build these centers of excellence. The impact on the supply chain, however, is definitely there. Maybe for some companies it's higher, for lower. It depends also where the company is in terms of its maturity in the supply chain. But the impact would be A, it brings in expertise to handle your supply chain. Second, it allows you to bring the visibility. Often such centers of excellence are equipped with either latest systems, which allow to run the companies to have a global visibility on where their shipments are, and also it allows the companies to collect correct data and enough data to run data analytics on later on improving the supply chain. It also allows companies to consolidate the volume that they purchase from the shippers. So of course, if you have centers of excellence, instead of every local station or plant buying their own transportation, you can actually combine purchasing to these centers of excellence. I would say, yeah, those would be 2 very quick effects or impacts from the 4P concept. And of course, there are many more. I mean, I can go on and talk about it for hours. But I think, if in a nutshell I had to think about, it's the visibility and the ability to consolidate volume, which would drive down the cost, will be the key ones.
Well, thank you, Pratik. And can you provide us with a brief background of yourself?
Yes, for sure. So I've been working in the field of supply chain for almost 12+ years now. I started my career a long time back when I was in India. I worked in supply chain consulting. I worked in operations, and then I've also worked in a lot of different countries. I worked in Germany, Belgium, Netherlands, Denmark, Austria, UK, and now Switzerland. I've worked with companies which provide freight forwarding services like DPDHL, like Maersk Group, and I've also worked for their customers. In terms of education, I have a master's from Cranfield University in the UK in logistics and supply chain, and I also have a special micro master's from the USA, MIT, USA. My interest, if I just to give it give an idea, my interest is on basically, if I have to talk about one very big problem that I find very interesting is around how do you have sustainable transportation, and by that I do not only mean that have trucks which go with carbon free, with less carbon emissions, or warehouses which run on solar energy. But what I also mean is that actually, how can we collaborate across the industry? So instead of having 2 companies which have their let's say warehouses in close by, why not find a way to bring them together and actually have shipments going out of those locations and combine them? Often the difficulty is how are you going to share the benefits in them, but I think that's something that we should work on, and we should be able to consolidate more cargo, bring down the emissions, and also improve the supply chain and make it more cost effective. We have already seen the example of such cases with the businesses like Uber. What they're basically doing is that they want to make sure that the car or the asset is used as much as possible, and that could also be the idea around horizontal collaboration, which is basically collaboration across the industry to combine the cargo for a lot of different customers together. Yeah, in a nutshell, that's my background. Yeah, that's all. Just